We heard you bought this gorgeous cabin in Aspen. We're moving in to leave all the grudges behind, my daughter-in-law barked, shoving her suitcases through my door like she already owned the place. I just smiled and let them barge in. But the second they stepped into the great room and saw what was waiting for them, every drop of color drained from their faces. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Harold Winston. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a mountain cabin in Aspen, Colorado. For 32 years, I built something from nothing. Started as a line cook at a diner in Denver, ended up owning 4 restaurants under my own name. Winston's Grill, maybe you've heard of it. Sold the whole chain 3 years ago for $3.8 million. Not bad for a kid who grew up washing dishes for minimum wage. Now, I spend my days fly fishing on the Roaring Fork River and collecting rare 19th century cookbooks. Peaceful life, quiet life, the kind of life I earned. At least that's what I thought. Let me tell you about my son Trenton. He's 41 now, works as a mid-level manager at some IT company in Aurora. Makes decent money, around $78,000 a year last I heard. Not that he ever talks to me about his life anymore. That stopped about 7 years ago, right around the time he married Deborah. Deborah Kelly, Deborah Winston now, is 38, doesn't work, and has never met a mirror she didn't like. She used to be a real estate agent before she decided that being Trenton's wife was a full-time job. Her full-time job, as far as I can tell, is spending money they don't have and looking down her nose at people she considers beneath her. That list, unfortunately, includes me. I remember when Trenton was a boy, he'd run to the door every time I came home from a shift, his little arms reaching up for me. "Daddy! Daddy!" He wanted to hear everything, what I cooked, who came in, what funny things happened. He used to say he'd work in my kitchen one day. That boy had stars in his eyes. I don't know where that boy went. The change was gradual at first. After the wedding, Trenton started calling less. Once a week became once a month. Once a month became holidays only. Then even the holidays got shorter. Christmas 2 years ago was the last time I saw them before everything fell apart. I'd made a prime rib roast, my specialty, and was telling a story about a famous food critic who once tried to sneak into my kitchen. Deborah rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. She picked at her food like it was beneath her, then announced she was watching her carbs, and pushed the plate away. Trenton said nothing. He just stared at his hands. But the moment that really opened my eyes happened about a year ago. I'd called Trenton's phone, and he must have pocket answered because I heard voices. Their voices. That old man still kicking around? That was Deborah, her tone dripping with something I can only describe as contempt, mixed with impatience. "When's he going to leave us the money and stop being such a burden?" I waited for Trenton to defend me, to say something, anything. "Soon, probably," my son replied. "He's not getting any younger." I hung up, sat in my kitchen for about an hour, just staring at the wall. 32 years of building a legacy, and my own son was just waiting for me to die so he could cash in. That's when I started paying attention. Really paying attention. 4 months ago, I got a curious phone call. Dr. Mitchell, an old acquaintance from the country club, called to ask if everything was all right with my health. I said I was fine. Why? He hesitated, then told me that a woman claiming to be my daughter-in-law had been asking him questions. Very specific questions. About the process for having an elderly relative declared mentally incompetent. About guardianship procedures in Colorado. I thanked him and hung up. Then I made some calls of my own, which brings me to 3 days ago. The doorbell rang at 2 in the afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone. Vivian, my neighbor, usually just walks in through the back, and the delivery guys know to leave packages on the porch. I set down my coffee and walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see 2 figures. Tall one, shorter one. Lots of luggage. I opened the door. "Dad!" Deborah, yes, she calls me Dad now, isn't that something? Pushed past me before I could say a word. She was dragging 2 massive suitcases behind her, their wheels scraping against my hardwood floors. "We heard you bought this gorgeous cabin in Aspen. We're moving in. Time to put all those silly misunderstandings behind us, don't you think?" Trenton stood behind her, looking everywhere except at my face. He had 3 more bags. "Deborah," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. "Trenton, what a surprise. Isn't it wonderful? Deborah was already surveying the living room, her eyes calculating, assessing. I recognized that look. I'd seen real estate agents wear it when they were mentally pricing a property. Family reunited at last. We've been so distant lately. And I said to Trenton, we need to fix this. Family is everything. Family is everything, I repeated. The words tasted like ash. Trenton finally met my eyes. For just a moment, I saw something there. Guilt, maybe, or shame. Then it was gone, replaced by that blank look Deborah had trained into him. "It's good to see you, Dad," he said. "Is it?" Deborah laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Oh, Harold, always with the jokes. Now, which room is ours? We've had such a long drive from Aurora." I smiled, a genuine smile, which seemed to unsettle her slightly. "Of course. Let me help you with those bags." As they struggled with their luggage in the hallway, bickering about which suitcase went where, I reached into my pocket. My phone was there, right where I'd put it when I heard their car pull up. I pressed record. The first 3 days of our family reunion were educational. Deborah started redecorating my home before she'd even unpacked. "These curtains, Dad, they look so cheap. We should replace them." She ran her fingers along the hand-woven fabric I'd bought from a local artisan in Snowmass Village. "I know a great designer in Denver. She could really transform this place." Transform. That's an interesting word choice. Transform my $2.3 million cabin into something that fit her taste, her vision, her name on the deed, eventually. "I'll think about it," I said, and went to make coffee. Trenton was useless, of course. He agreed with everything Deborah said, nodding along like one of those bobblehead dogs people put on their dashboards. "She's right, Dad. The place could use some updates." He wouldn't look at me when he said it. I remembered a different Trenton, 12 years old, standing in my kitchen after hours, carefully plating a practice dish. "Is this right, Dad?" "Perfect," I told him. "You're a natural." That boy had opinions, dreams, a spine. Somewhere along the way, Deborah had surgically removed it. On the second day, I conducted a small experiment. I left some documents on the kitchen table, the property appraisal for the cabin. $2.3 million, right there in black and white. Then I went to my study and watched through the crack in the door. Deborah found them within 20 minutes. She looked around, checking if anyone was watching, then pulled out her phone. Click, click, click. Photographing every page. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She thought she was being clever. She had no idea she was dancing exactly to my tune. That evening I announced I was going for a walk. "The fresh mountain air helps me think," I said. "Might be gone a few hours." "Oh, take your time, Dad." Deborah's smile was all teeth. "We'll hold down the fort." I drove to Denver instead. Marcus Reynolds' office was on the 15th floor of a building on Court Place. He specialized in elder law, protecting seniors from exploitation, handling estate disputes, that sort of thing. I'd found him through careful research, not through any personal connection. When you're planning for battle, you don't want your general to have divided loyalties. Mr. Winston. He shook my hand firmly. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You said on the phone this was urgent." I told him everything. The overheard phone call, Dr. Mitchell's warning, Deborah's questions about incompetency proceedings, the photographs I'd just watched her take. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. "Colorado has strong laws protecting at-risk adults," he said, "but guardianship cases can get complicated. They'll need medical evidence that you're incapable of managing your own affairs." "Which doesn't exist," I said, "because there's nothing wrong with me." "That's your advantage. Document everything. Record conversations. Colorado is a one-party consent state, and I think we should bring in additional help. I know a private investigator, former police detective, very discreet. If your daughter-in-law has been making moves, Carla will find out." Carla Summers. I'd remember that name. We spent 2 hours mapping out a preliminary defense strategy. By the time I left, the sun had set, and the drive back to Aspen would take nearly 4 hours. I didn't mind. I had a lot to think about. I remembered another moment, years ago. Deborah had just started dating Trenton, and they'd visited the restaurant. I'd cooked for them personally. Seared duck breast with cherry reduction. Deborah had taken one bite and pushed the plate away. "It's very rustic," she'd said. I prefer French cuisine. Refined, you know. Even then, she was reshaping him, filing down his edges. Why didn't I fight for my son back then? Because I believed family was supposed to work itself out. I was wrong. The drive back to Aspen was dark and winding. The mountains rose around me like silent witnesses. I thought about my restaurants, the thousands of decisions I'd made over 3 decades. Every hire, every menu change, every negotiation with suppliers and landlords and critics. I'd built an empire from nothing because I understood one fundamental truth. You can't wait for problems to solve themselves. You have to act. It was nearly 11 when I pulled into my driveway. The cabin was mostly dark, but a light was on in my study. I entered quietly through the side door, my footsteps soft on the hardwood. The study door was open just a crack. Through it, I could see Deborah. She was standing at my desk, phone in hand, photographing my financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, the deed to the cabin. She didn't hear me behind her. She was too focused on her work, her face illuminated by the phone screen, a small smile playing on her lips, the smile of someone who thinks they're winning. I leaned against the doorframe and cleared my throat. Deborah spun around, and for one beautiful moment, I saw pure panic in her eyes. It vanished almost instantly, replaced by that practiced smile. "Dad, you're back early? I thought I heard a noise in here. Wanted to make sure everything was okay. At 11 at night, in my private study, with your phone out. I was checking the time." She slipped the phone into her pocket. "Silly me? Well, good night." She brushed past me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something expensive, probably bought with money Trenton didn't have. I watched her go. Then I walked to my desk, sat down, and began to write. Names, dates, observations. Everything I'd seen, everything I suspected, everything I knew. The game had begun, and unlike my son's wife, I knew exactly how it was going to end. 4 days had passed since their arrival, and I was learning more about my house guests than I ever wanted to know. The next morning, I invited them to join me in the great room. "Family meeting," I announced at breakfast. "Something important I need to discuss with you both." Deborah's eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting 777s. She exchanged a quick glance with Trenton, a glance that said, "This is it, the inheritance talk." They practically sprinted to the living room, settling into the leather couch with expectant smiles plastered across their faces. What they didn't know was that I'd been up since 5, arranging the room for maximum impact. 3 chairs positioned near the fireplace, a thick manila folder on the coffee table labeled Winston Case File in bold black letters, and waiting in my study, ready to enter on cue, 3 people Deborah and Trenton had never met. "Before we begin," I said, standing by the window, "I'd like to introduce some colleagues who've been helping me with a few matters." I nodded toward the hallway. Marcus Reynolds entered first, briefcase in hand, every inch the professional attorney. Behind him came Nathan Price, a notary I'd engaged specifically for this occasion, gray-haired, dignified, carrying a leather portfolio. And finally, a woman in her mid-40s with short dark hair and the watchful eyes of someone who'd spent 20 years as a police detective before going private. "This is Marcus Reynolds, my attorney," I said. "Nathan Price, a licensed notary. And Carla Summers, a private investigator I retained several weeks ago." The color drained from Deborah's face so fast I thought she might faint. Trenton's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. Neither of them moved. "Please," I gestured to the couch, "sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Carla placed the folder on the coffee table and opened it. The first item was a photograph, Deborah, standing outside a medical office building in Denver. The sign in the background was clearly visible. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, M.D., Psychiatry and Geriatric Mental Health. "Taken 3 weeks ago," Carla said, her voice neutral, professional. "Your daughter-in-law made 2 visits to this office. She was asking about the process for having a family member evaluated for dementia." Deborah found her voice. That's an invasion of privacy. You can't just follow people around and take pictures." "Actually," Marcus interjected, "in Colorado there's no reasonable expectation of privacy in public spaces. Photographing someone entering a building from a public sidewalk is entirely legal." Carla continued, pulling out more documents. "I also obtained records of internet searches conducted from your home IP address. She spread the printouts on the table. How to have someone declared mentally incompetent in Colorado. Guardianship laws for elderly parents. How long does it take to become someone's legal guardian? Trenton's face had gone from pale to green. Dad, I can explain. Can you? I asked, because I'd love to hear it. We were just concerned about you, living alone up here at your age. We wanted to make sure you were being taken care of. By taking control of my finances, by having me declared incompetent. I kept my voice level, almost conversational. That's an interesting definition of taking care of someone. Deborah had recovered enough to go on the offensive. This is ridiculous. You've been spying on us, recording our conversations. She turned to Marcus. That's illegal. We'll sue. Marcus didn't even blink. Colorado is a one-party consent state, Mrs. Winston. That means any conversation can be legally recorded, as long as one participant consents. Your father-in-law consented to record his own conversations in his own home. Perfectly legal. Furthermore, Carla added, I have records of a phone call you made 4 months ago to Dr. Richard Mitchell. You told him you were concerned about your father-in-law's episodes of confusion and asked detailed questions about dementia diagnoses. I watched Deborah's face cycle through emotions. Shock, anger, fear, and finally something cold and calculating. She was regrouping, looking for an angle. Fine, she said finally, her voice hard. So we were exploring our options. That's not a crime. We're family, and we have every right to be concerned about Harold's well-being. You have a right to be concerned, Marcus agreed. You do not have a right to commit fraud. Attempting to have someone declared incompetent when you know they're mentally sound, especially for financial gain, constitutes attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult under Colorado law. It's a felony. The word felony hung in the air like smoke. Trenton looked like he might be sick. Deborah's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. We haven't done anything, she said. We haven't filed any paperwork. We haven't made any legal moves. You can't charge us with attempting something we didn't actually attempt. She had a point, and she knew it. I could see the confidence returning to her eyes. You're right, I said. You haven't crossed any legal lines yet, which is why I'm giving you a choice. Pack your bags and leave my home by tomorrow morning, and we'll consider this matter closed. Stay, and I will pursue every legal avenue available to me. Deborah stood up slowly. She smoothed her blouse, adjusted her hair, and looked at me with something approaching contempt. We're not going anywhere, Harold. This is your son's home, too. He has a right to be here. We're family whether you like it or not. And if you try to force us out, we'll fight you in court. She smiled, a cold, sharp thing. We'll tell them you're paranoid, delusional, hiring private investigators to spy on your own family. That doesn't sound like the behavior of a mentally stable person. She walked out of the room, head held high. After a moment of hesitation, Trenton followed her, not meeting my eyes. The next few weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. True to her word, Deborah didn't leave. Instead, she dug in like a tick, making herself comfortable in my guest room and acting like she owned the place. When I consulted Marcus about eviction options, his answer wasn't encouraging. Colorado law is complicated when it comes to house guests, he explained over the phone. They're not tenants, so standard eviction procedures don't apply. But because you invited them in initially, you can't just call the sheriff and have them removed. You'll need to go through the courts, and that could take weeks, maybe months. Months? The thought of sharing my home with these people for months made my stomach turn, but if I couldn't remove them quickly, I could certainly make their stay less pleasant. The first thing I did was cancel the cable television and internet service. Budget cuts, I explained when Deborah stormed into the kitchen, demanding to know why she couldn't stream her shows. I'm on a fixed income now, have to prioritize my spending. Fixed income? She practically spat the words. You sold your restaurants for almost $4 million. And I plan to make it last, I said, pouring myself another cup of coffee. Unlike some people, I know how to manage money. The look on her face was almost worth everything else. Next, I stopped buying groceries for the household. My refrigerator, once stocked with fresh produce and quality meats, now contained only items for my personal consumption, labeled with my name, stored in separate containers. You're both adults, I said when Trenton hesitantly asked about dinner plans. 41 years old, both of you. I'm sure you can figure out how to feed yourselves. Deborah tried to use my kitchen to cook meals from ingredients she bought herself. Unfortunately, she discovered that several key appliances had developed mysterious malfunctions. The oven's temperature control seemed unreliable, running hot one day, barely warming the next. The garbage disposal made alarming grinding noises. The dishwasher leaked water onto the floor. Nothing dangerous, of course. I'm not a monster. But certainly inconvenient for someone accustomed to having everything handed to her. You should call a repairman, Deborah snapped one evening after burning her third attempt at dinner. I will, I said, not looking up from my book, when I get around to it. The final touch was the roof repair I'd been planning for months. I contacted a contractor I knew from my restaurant days, a man who understood the value of starting work bright and early. A crew of 6 workers arrived at exactly 7 in the morning, their hammers and power tools creating a symphony of chaos that made sleep impossible. The work continued for 2 weeks straight. Sorry about the noise, I told Trenton one morning as he stumbled into the kitchen looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes, coffee cup shaking in his hand. But you know how it is. Got to maintain the property. This cabin's going to be worth even more once the roof is fixed. You'd want that, right? For when you eventually inherit it? He just stared at me with hollow eyes, said nothing, and shuffled back to his room. While the domestic Cold War continued, Carla was busy behind the scenes. She called me one evening with an update that made my blood pressure spike. I've been digging deeper into Deborah's background, she said. She didn't just visit one psychiatrist about you. She consulted with 3 different doctors over the past 6 months, all of them specializing in geriatric mental health. She told each of them the same story, that she was deeply concerned about an elderly family member showing signs of significant cognitive decline. Memory problems, confusion, poor judgment with finances. Building a paper trail, I said. Exactly. She's been setting this up for a long time, Mr. Winston. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment scheme. This was planned, methodical. She knew exactly what documentation she'd need to make a guardianship case stick. I thanked Carla and hung up. Then I sat in my study for a long time, watching the sun set behind the mountains, thinking about my son and the woman he'd married, thinking about how carefully Deborah had planned this, how patient she'd been. 6 months of groundwork, laying the foundation for her scheme brick by brick. She'd underestimated me. They both had. But I had to admit, she wasn't stupid, just greedy. 3 days later, the official letter arrived. It came in a thick envelope with the seal of the Pitkin County District Court. I recognized it before I even opened the flap. Inside was a formal petition for emergency guardianship, filed by Trenton and Deborah Winston on behalf of their incapacitated family member, Harold Winston. Me. The petition cited serious concerns about cognitive decline, increasingly erratic behavior, and demonstrable inability to manage personal and financial affairs. It requested that the court appoint Trenton as my legal guardian, with full authority over my medical decisions, living situation, and finances. I read it twice, slowly, letting every word sink in. Then I set it down on my desk and looked out the window. They'd actually done it. After everything, the evidence I'd shown them, the warnings, the chance to walk away clean. They'd decided to double down. They thought they could win this. They thought I was bluffing or too soft, or too old to fight back properly. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Reynolds. They filed, I said. Emergency guardianship petition. Just got the paperwork. A pause on the other end. Then surprisingly, good. Good? Now they've committed to a course of action they can't take back. Now we have something concrete to respond to. And Mr. Winston, I think it's time we stopped playing defense. It's time to go on the offensive. I looked out the window at the mountains, still snow-capped, even as spring crept closer. Somewhere out there, a hawk circled in the afternoon sky, patient and watchful. I couldn't agree more, I said. Set up a meeting. You, me, Carla, and Nathan. Let's show them what happens when you underestimate a 68-year-old man who built 4 restaurants from nothing. The meeting took place 2 days later in Marcus's Denver office. We gathered around his conference table. Me, Marcus, Carla, and Nathan Price, the notary who'd witnessed my original confrontation with Deborah and Trenton. Outside the windows, the city sprawled below us, cars crawling like ants along the streets. First things first, Marcus said, spreading documents across the table. We're filing a counterpetition, not just opposing their guardianship claim. We're going on the offensive. Harassment, attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult. In Colorado, that's a Class 5 felony. Will it stick? I asked. That depends on how much evidence we can gather. And speaking of evidence, he nodded toward Carla. She opened her laptop. I've been digging into Trenton and Deborah's financial situation. It's worse than we thought. She turned the screen so I could see a spreadsheet filled with red numbers. Credit card debt, $31,000 across 4 cards. Auto loan, another $12,000, 3 payments behind. Personal loan from an online lender, $4,000 at 23% interest. Total outstanding debt, $47,000. I let out a low whistle. They're drowning. It gets better. Their apartment in Aurora, they haven't paid rent in 2 months. The landlord filed for eviction last week. They're about to be homeless. Suddenly, their desperate behavior made more sense. This wasn't just greed. It was survival. They'd burned through whatever money they had, and now they were clinging to my cabin like it was a life raft. There's something else, Carla continued. I found records of Deborah consulting with not just 3, but 4 different psychiatrists over the past 6 months. Each time, she told them the same story about an elderly relative showing signs of dementia. She was shopping for a diagnosis, Mr. Winston, looking for someone who'd give her the paperwork she needed to make a guardianship claim. Marcus nodded grimly. That's a pattern of behavior. It shows premeditation. Combined with their financial desperation, we can argue that this was a calculated scheme to defraud you. So what's our next move? I asked. 2 things. First, you need to undergo a comprehensive medical evaluation. Independent clinic, board-certified geriatrician, full cognitive assessment. When we go to court, I want to be able to present documentation proving beyond any doubt that you're mentally competent. And second, Marcus smiled, a thin, predatory expression. We file our counterpetition, and we don't just defend, we attack. We demand compensation for harassment, for the damage to your reputation, and we seek an immediate order requiring them to vacate your property. I drove back to Aspen that evening, my mind churning with everything I'd learned. $47,000 in debt. Facing eviction. No wonder Deborah had been so aggressive. She wasn't just trying to steal my money. She was trying to save herself from financial ruin. The medical evaluation happened the following week at a clinic in Denver that Marcus recommended. Dr. Sandra Chen, a geriatrician with 20 years of experience, put me through 4 hours of tests, memory assessments, cognitive exercises, physical examination, blood work, brain scans. When the results came back 3 days later, I was sitting in Dr. Chen's office, watching her review the paperwork. Mr. Winston, she said finally, looking up with a slight smile, I wish all my patients were in this good a shape. Your cognitive function tests at the 98th percentile for your age group. Your memory is excellent. Your reasoning skills are sharp. There is absolutely no indication of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any other cognitive impairment. Would you be willing to testify to that in court? I'd be happy to. I thanked her and left, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. This was ammunition, solid, undeniable proof that their entire case was built on lies. Marcus filed our counterpetition the next day. The documents outlined everything: Deborah's psychiatrist shopping, their financial desperation, the pattern of deceptive behavior. We demanded $5,000 in compensation for emotional distress and reputational damage, plus immediate eviction. The waiting game began. Back at the cabin, things grew increasingly tense. Deborah had stopped pretending to be pleasant. She barely spoke to me except to make snide comments about old men who don't know what's good for them. Trenton avoided me entirely, spending most of his time in their bedroom or taking long drives. I went about my routine, fly fishing in the morning, reading in the afternoon, documenting everything they said and did. The recording app on my phone had become my constant companion. Then a week after we filed our counterpetition, Carla called. I found something interesting, she said. Very interesting. What is it? A pause. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. It looks like this isn't the first time Deborah has tried something like this. I've been digging into her employment history, and I found a complaint filed against her when she was working as a real estate agent 6 years ago, before she even met Trenton. What kind of complaint? An elderly client accused her of manipulation, said Deborah tried to convince her to sell her house for well below market value to a friend who would take good care of the property. The complaint was filed but never went anywhere. The company settled quietly to avoid publicity, but the records exist, and the client is still alive. My grip on the phone tightened. Can we use this? If we can establish a pattern of predatory behavior toward elderly people? Absolutely. This could be the key to everything. The next morning, I asked Carla to come to Aspen and present her findings in person. She arrived around noon, carrying a briefcase stuffed with documents. We sat in my study, the door closed, while she laid out everything she'd found. Her name was Eleanor Vance, Carla began, spreading photographs across my desk. 74 years old at the time. Widowed. Living alone in a house in Littleton that she'd owned for 40 years. She showed me a picture of a silver-haired woman with kind eyes. The kind of grandmother you'd see in a holiday commercial. Deborah was her real estate agent. Eleanor wanted to downsize. Simple enough, right? Except Deborah had other ideas. Carla pulled out a complaint form filed with the Colorado Real Estate Commission. According to Eleanor's statement, Deborah told her the house needed extensive repairs. Foundation problems, roof damage, electrical issues. She recommended selling quickly, below market value, and she just happened to know a buyer. Let me guess, I said. The buyer was a friend of Deborah's. Her cousin. The house was worth around $400,000. Deborah tried to get Eleanor to sell it for $250,000. What happened? Eleanor's daughter got suspicious. Hired an independent inspector who found nothing wrong. The real estate company let Deborah go quietly. No formal discipline. They were more concerned about reputation than justice. Carla leaned back. But I tracked down Eleanor. She's 80 now, living in Boulder, and she's willing to testify. There's more, Carla continued. A former colleague named Jennifer Marsh witnessed Deborah bragging about the Easy Mark. She's also willing to talk. That evening I called Marcus with the news. His reaction was immediate. This changes everything, he said. Pattern of behavior is gold in these cases. If we can show she's done this before to another elderly victim, the court will see her guardianship petition for what it really is. Another scheme. How do we proceed? We amend our counter-petition, add the Eleanor Vance information, and we prepare for the hearing. The tension in the cabin reached a breaking point 2 days later. I was in the kitchen making lunch when Deborah stormed in, her face contorted with rage. "You're trying to destroy me!" she screamed. "Digging up old lies, ancient history." I continued spreading mustard on my bread. Those ancient events have everything to do with who you are, Deborah. A pattern is a pattern. I was cleared. There were no charges. There was a settlement. There was a termination. There was an elderly woman you tried to cheat out of $150,000. I looked at her. Sound familiar? Her face went from red to white. Her hands were trembling. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked genuinely afraid. "Trenton!" she screamed. "Get in here!" My son appeared, looking exhausted. "What's going on?" "Your father is trying to ruin us." "I'm simply telling the truth," I said. "Something your wife has trouble recognizing." Trenton looked between us. "Dad, can we talk? Just the two of us?" Deborah whirled on him. "What? No. Deborah, please." There was something in his voice I hadn't heard in years, almost like backbone. "I need to talk to my father." She stared at him, shocked, then stormed out. We stood in silence. Then he sat down and put his head in his hands. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." "For what, specifically? The guardianship petition? The years of silence? All of it. Did you know about Eleanor Vance?" "No, I swear I didn't. But you knew what Deborah was planning for me." He finally looked up, eyes red. "I knew it was wrong, the whole time. But I couldn't—" "You couldn't say no to her?" He nodded miserably. "Tell me something, Trenton. In 7 years of marriage, have you ever once done something she didn't want? Made a decision she didn't approve of?" The silence stretched between us. He had no answer. The next evening, I was sitting on my back porch, watching the sunset, when my neighbor Vivian appeared at the fence line. She was wrapped in a cashmere shawl against the mountain chill, her silver hair gleaming in the fading light. "Harold," she called softly, "do you have a moment?" I waved her over. She settled into the chair beside me, her expression troubled. "I saw something today," she said. "Something I thought you should know about." "What is it?" "Your daughter-in-law. I was having coffee at the Roast. You know, that little cafe downtown? And I saw her there with a man. They were at a corner table, talking very intensely. She had papers spread out between them." "A man?" "40s, maybe. Dark suit, expensive watch. Very polished." Vivian frowned. "It didn't look romantic, Harold. It looked like business. Like she was hiring him for something. Or planning something." I felt my stomach tighten. "Did you hear anything they said?" "Just bits and pieces. Something about documents and the court and making it stick." "Harold, I don't want to alarm you, but it looked like she was working on something behind everyone's back, even her husband's." I thanked Vivian and watched her walk back to her house. Then I picked up my phone and called Carla. "I need you to find out who Deborah met with today," I said. "A man at the Roast Cafe in downtown Aspen. 40s, dark suit. She's planning something new." It took Carla less than 48 hours to identify the mystery man. "His name is Randall Morgan," she told me over the phone. "Attorney based in Aurora. Specializes in what he calls aggressive family representation. In plain English, that means he helps clients get their hands on assets through whatever means necessary." "What kind of means?" "The kind that walks a very thin line between legal and illegal. He's been investigated twice by the Colorado Bar Association. Both times the complaints were dropped due to lack of evidence. But his reputation in legal circles is, let's say, colorful." I processed this information slowly. "So Deborah hired a second lawyer, without telling Trenton." "That's what it looks like. And here's the interesting part. I found some paperwork that Morgan filed with the Pitkin County Court yesterday. He's claiming to represent the interests of the Winston family estate. He submitted a document that he claims is your will." My blood went cold. "My will?" "A will you supposedly signed 3 years ago, leaving everything to Trenton. The cabin, your investments, your savings, all of it. Morgan is petitioning the court to recognize this document as valid and to freeze all your assets until the guardianship case is resolved." I sat down heavily in my study chair. This was a serious escalation. If the court froze my assets, I wouldn't be able to pay Marcus, Carla, or anyone else helping me. I'd be financially paralyzed. "There's just one problem," I said. "What's that?" "I never signed any such will. I don't even have a will that leaves everything to Trenton. This document, whatever it is a forgery." Silence on the other end. Then Carla spoke, her voice careful. "Mr. Winston, are you absolutely certain? Is there any possibility you signed something years ago that you might have forgotten about?" "Carla, I built 4 restaurants from scratch. I've signed thousands of documents in my life. Contracts, leases, permits, tax forms. I remember every important signature I've ever put on paper. And I have never, ever signed a will leaving my entire estate to my son." "Then we need to prove that. I'll contact a forensic handwriting expert. If that signature is forged, we'll know within a week." I hung up and stared out the window at the mountains. Deborah had been busy. While I thought I was playing chess, she'd been playing a completely different game, one I hadn't even known about. But forgery was a felony. If we could prove the document was fake, this wouldn't just be a civil matter anymore. It would be criminal. The next few days were a blur of activity. I met with Nathan Price, the notary, and officially drafted a new will. This one was very different from whatever fiction Deborah had created. 90% of my estate would go to a charitable foundation I was establishing, the Winston Young Restaurateurs Fund, dedicated to helping aspiring restaurant owners get their start. The remaining 10% would go into a trust for Trenton, but with conditions. He could only access the money after completing a financial literacy course and maintaining stable employment for 5 years. "Are you sure about this?" Nathan asked as I signed the document. "Completely sure. If my son wants my money, he'll have to earn it, the way I earned it." Meanwhile, Randall Morgan's petition moved through the court system. A hearing was scheduled for the following week. If we couldn't prove the will was forged before then, the judge might grant the asset freeze. It was a race against time. Carla worked her contacts, finding the best forensic document examiner in the state, a woman named Dr. Patricia Webb, who had testified in over 200 court cases. Dr. Webb agreed to expedite her analysis, understanding the urgency of the situation. 3 days before the hearing, she called with her findings. "Mr. Winston," she said, "I've completed my examination of the signature on the document Mr. Morgan submitted. I compared it to 12 verified samples of your signature from various sources: bank documents, property records, business contracts, and the signature on this will is not yours. There are significant inconsistencies in the letter formation, pen pressure, and baseline alignment. Whoever signed this document was attempting to copy your signature, but they made several telltale errors." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "You're certain?" "I'd stake my professional reputation on it. This signature is a forgery. I'll have my full report ready for the hearing." I thanked her and hung up. Then I called Marcus Reynolds. "The handwriting expert confirmed it," I said. "The will is fake." A pause. When Marcus spoke, there was satisfaction in his voice. "This changes everything, Harold. Forgery is a Class 5 felony in Colorado. Whoever created that document, and whoever submitted it to the court, could be looking at prison time." "What do we do now?" "We go on the offensive. I'll file a motion with the court presenting Dr. Webb's findings, and I'll contact the Pitkin County Sheriff's Office. It's time to turn this into a criminal matter." The hearing arrived on a gray morning, clouds heavy over the mountains. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus, watching as Randall Morgan strutted into the courtroom like he owned it. He was exactly as Vivian had described: polished, expensive, and utterly confident. Behind him came Deborah and Trenton. Deborah's face was a mask of determination. Trenton looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Judge Catherine Holloway presided, a silver-haired woman in her 60s, with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. She reviewed the stack of documents before her, her expression unreadable. "We're here on the matter of Morgan versus Winston," she began. "Mr. Morgan, you've submitted a petition to freeze Mr. Harold Winston's assets based on a will you claim he signed 3 years ago. Is that correct?" Morgan rose smoothly. "That's correct, Your Honor. My client, Mrs. Deborah Winston, is concerned that Mr. Winston's recent erratic behavior suggests he may be suffering from cognitive decline. We believe it's in the family's best interest to preserve the estate until—" "Your Honor," Marcus interrupted, rising from his chair, "before Mr. Morgan continues, I'd like to present evidence that fundamentally undermines his entire petition." Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Marcus handed copies of Dr. Webb's report to the judge and opposing counsel. "This is a forensic analysis conducted by Dr. Patricia Webb, one of the most respected document examiners in the state. Her conclusion is unambiguous. The signature on the will Mr. Morgan submitted is a forgery. My client never signed this document." The color drained from Morgan's face. He recovered quickly, but not before I caught the flash of panic in his eyes. Deborah, sitting behind him, went very still. "Your Honor," Morgan said, his voice tight, "this is highly irregular. We've had no opportunity to review this report, or challenge its findings." "The report was filed with the court yesterday, Mr. Morgan. Perhaps you should have reviewed it before this hearing." Judge Holloway's tone was ice. She studied the document for a long moment. "Dr. Webb's credentials are impeccable, and her methodology is sound. Unless you can provide evidence to contradict her findings, I'm inclined to take this very seriously." "Your Honor, my client provided this document in good faith." "In good faith?" I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Your client created a forged will to steal my property. That's not good faith. That's fraud." Judge Holloway held up a hand. "Mr. Winston, please let your attorney speak for you." But I caught the hint of approval in her eyes. Marcus pressed forward. "Your Honor, given Dr. Webb's findings, we're not just asking you to deny Mr. Morgan's petition. We're requesting that you refer this matter to the Pitkin County Sheriff's Office for criminal investigation. The submission of a forged document to this court constitutes fraud upon the court, and the creation of that document is forgery, a Class 5 felony." The courtroom went silent. Deborah's composure finally cracked. She leaned forward and hissed something at Morgan. I couldn't hear what, but his face darkened. "Your Honor," Morgan said, speaking rapidly now, My client provided me with this document. If there are any issues with its authenticity, I had no knowledge of them. I acted in good faith based on what my client gave me. He was throwing Deborah under the bus, just like that. Deborah stood up, her voice shrill. That's not true. He told me he could make it work. He said, Mrs. Winston, sit down, Judge Holloway commanded. You'll have an opportunity to speak through your counsel. But Deborah was beyond reason now. This is ridiculous. We're family. I was just trying to protect my husband's inheritance from a senile old man who... Enough! The judge's voice cut through the courtroom like a knife. Mrs. Winston, another outburst, and I'll have you removed. She turned to a court officer. Please contact the sheriff's office. I'm referring this matter for criminal investigation. The gavel came down. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Then a soft knock at my bedroom door. Dad? Trenton's voice barely above a whisper. I opened the door. My son stood there in his pajamas, looking 10 years older. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard. We went to the kitchen. I made coffee. We sat across from each other, steam rising between us. I'm sorry, Trenton said finally. For everything. You keep saying that, because I mean it. He stared into his mug. I knew this was wrong from the beginning. The whole plan. But I went along because Deborah told me to. I'm a coward, Dad. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The boy who used to run to greet me was still in there somewhere, buried under years of manipulation. Knowing something is wrong and doing it anyway isn't weakness, Trenton. It's a choice. Every time you went along with her schemes, every time you stayed silent, those were choices. Tears ran down his face. I know. But here's the thing about choices. You can always make different ones, starting now. He looked up at me, hope flickering in his eyes. I'm not forgiving you, I said. Not yet. But the door isn't closed. It's up to you whether you walk through it. The next morning I woke to silence. Deborah's car was gone. Her wallet, her phone, her purse, all missing. But her suitcases remained in the guest room. She had run. The Pitkin County Sheriff arrived within the hour. I stood on my porch with Trenton, watching as Deputy Martinez took notes and asked questions. How long had Deborah been gone? What was she driving? Did we know where she might go? She has a sister in Las Vegas, Trenton said quietly. Monica? They're close, Deputy Martinez nodded. We'll coordinate with Nevada authorities. In the meantime, there's a warrant out for her arrest. Forgery, fraud, attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult. If she crosses state lines to avoid prosecution, we can add federal charges. After the deputy left, Trenton and I sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where, just hours ago, he'd finally found the courage to apologize. What happens now? He asked. For Deborah? Prison, probably, or a very good plea deal. And for me? I looked at my son. He seemed smaller somehow, deflated, like someone had let all the air out of him. That depends on you. The prosecutor will want to talk to you. If you cooperate fully, testify against Deborah, tell them everything you know about the forged will, they might drop any charges against you. I'll do it. He said it immediately, without hesitation. I'll tell them everything. Over the next 5 days, Carla tracked Deborah's movements, credit card purchases at gas stations along Interstate 70, then south through New Mexico, then west to Nevada. She was headed exactly where Trenton had predicted, to her sister's house in Las Vegas. On the 6th day, Carla called with news. Nevada State Police picked her up this morning. She was at her sister's apartment, apparently put up quite a fight, screaming about her rights, threatening lawsuits. They're holding her pending extradition to Colorado. I hung up and allowed myself a small smile. The net was closing. While we waited for extradition proceedings, I focused on tying up loose ends. Marcus helped me finalize the new will and establish the Winston Young Restaurateurs Fund. Nathan Price notarized everything. The charitable foundation would receive 90% of my estate upon my death, while the remaining 10% would go into a trust for Trenton, accessible only after he completed a financial literacy course and maintained stable employment for 5 consecutive years. Are you sure about the conditions? Marcus asked as I signed the paperwork. Absolutely. My son needs to learn that money is earned, not given. If he wants his inheritance, he'll have to prove he can handle it. The extradition process took 2 weeks. Colorado filed the formal request. Nevada processed the paperwork. and eventually a pair of deputies flew to Las Vegas to escort Deborah back to Pitkin County. I wasn't there when they brought her in, but Carla was, and she described the scene in vivid detail. She looked terrible, Carla said. Hair a mess, no makeup, wearing the same clothes she'd been arrested in. When they walked her into the courthouse, she kept looking around like she expected someone to rescue her. No one did. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. But before that could happen, there was one more piece of business to conclude. Trenton had to leave. He'd been staying in the guest room since Deborah's disappearance, a ghost haunting my hallways. We barely spoke, except when necessary. The tension was exhausting for both of us. The morning of his departure, I found him in the kitchen, drinking coffee and staring out the window at the mountains. "The car's packed," he said without turning around. "Where will you go?" "Back to Aurora. The apartment's still there. Barely." I talked to the landlord, worked out a payment plan for the back rent. He finally looked at me. "I'm going to start over, Dad. Get my life together. Pay off the debts. Find a real job." "Good." He stood there, awkward, uncertain. Is there any chance? For us, I mean. For our relationship?" I considered the question carefully. This was my son, the boy who used to run to greet me, who dreamed of cooking in my kitchen, but also the man who had conspired with his wife to steal my property, to have me declared incompetent, to take everything I'd built. "The door isn't closed, Trenton. I told you that. But you need to earn your way back. Start with fixing your own life. The debts, the job, the self-respect. Come back to me in a year as a different person, and we'll talk." He nodded slowly. "A year? 1 year. Prove to me you've changed." He walked to the door, then stopped. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Thank you for not giving up on me completely." I watched him drive away, his rental car disappearing down the mountain road. Then I went inside and poured myself another cup of coffee. 3 days later, Deborah was formally arraigned in Pitkin County Court. The charges: forgery, fraud upon the court, and attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult. She pleaded not guilty, but her court-appointed attorney, she could no longer afford Randall Morgan's services, and he wanted nothing to do with her anyway, looked distinctly uncomfortable. The judge set bail at $50,000. Deborah couldn't pay it. She would remain in custody until the trial. The trial began on a crisp autumn morning, the mountains blazing with color outside the courthouse windows. I sat in the front row of the gallery, Marcus Reynolds beside me. Across the aisle, Deborah sat at the defense table, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman who had pushed her way into my cabin months ago. Her hair was limp, her face pale and drawn, her expensive clothes replaced by a plain gray suit that hung loosely on her frame. The prosecution called its witnesses one by one. First came Jennifer Marsh, Deborah's former colleague from the real estate office. She described in devastating detail how Deborah had bragged about manipulating Eleanor Vance, the elderly woman she'd tried to cheat 6 years ago. She called her an easy mark, Jennifer testified, said old people were the best targets because they trusted too easily. Deborah's face went white. Her attorney objected, claiming the testimony was prejudicial, but the judge overruled. Pattern of behavior, the prosecutor argued. The jury needed to see who Deborah really was. Next came Eleanor Vance herself, now 80 years old but sharp as a tack. She told the jury how Deborah had tried to convince her to sell her home for $150,000 below market value. "She told me the house was falling apart," Eleanor said. "She told me I'd be lucky to get anything for it. If my daughter hadn't gotten suspicious, I would have lost everything." I watched Deborah as Eleanor testified. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her jaw tight. But there was something else in her eyes now. Not defiance, but fear. Carla Summers took the stand next, presenting the evidence she'd gathered, the photographs of Deborah visiting psychiatrists, the internet searches about guardianship procedures, the timeline of the conspiracy. She was thorough, professional, devastating. Then came Dr. Patricia Webb, the forensic document examiner. She explained in meticulous detail how she had analyzed the signature on the forged will and determined it was not mine. "The inconsistencies are numerous and significant," she said. "Whoever signed this document was attempting to imitate Mr. Winston's signature, but they made several critical errors. In your professional opinion, the prosecutor asked. Is there any possibility this signature is genuine? None whatsoever. Finally, it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand, took the oath, and sat down. The courtroom was silent, every eye on me. The prosecutor led me through my story. The overheard phone call, Dr. Mitchell's warning, Deborah and Trenton's sudden arrival at my cabin, the discovery of their scheme. I told it calmly, clearly, without embellishment. The facts spoke for themselves. Then came the question I'd been waiting for. Mr. Winston, the prosecutor said, what would you like to see happen as a result of these proceedings? I looked at Deborah. She met my eyes for just a moment, then looked away. I want other older people to know that they can't be so easily fooled, I said. Our years aren't a weakness, they're experience. We've seen more, learned more, survived more than people give us credit for. If my story can help one other person recognize when they're being manipulated, then everything I've been through will have been worth it. The closing arguments took most of the afternoon. Deborah's attorney did his best, arguing that his client had made mistakes but didn't deserve prison. The prosecutor countered with the facts, a pattern of predatory behavior, a calculated scheme to steal from a vulnerable person, a forged document submitted to a court of law. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, I knew from their faces what the verdict would be. On the charge of forgery, how do you find the defendant? Guilty. On the charge of fraud upon the court? Guilty. On the charge of attempted exploitation of an at-risk adult? Guilty. Deborah's face crumpled. For a moment she looked like she might collapse. Then something hardened in her eyes. Not acceptance, but bitter resignation. She had gambled everything and lost. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. 4 years of probation, $15,000 in restitution to me for legal costs, mandatory completion of a financial crimes rehabilitation program, and a permanent restraining order keeping her away from me. It wasn't prison, but it was justice. Randall Morgan, her attorney, faced his own consequences. The Colorado Bar Association opened an investigation into his conduct, and 3 months later, he surrendered his law license rather than face formal disbarment proceedings. As for Trenton, I heard from Vivian that he'd gotten a job at a restaurant in Denver. Not a fancy place, just a neighborhood grill, washing dishes and helping in the kitchen. He was starting from the bottom, the way I had started 50 years ago. He didn't call me. I didn't expect him to. But one day a letter arrived from the Winston Young Restaurateurs Fund. Someone had made an anonymous donation. $500. I knew who it was. The months passed. Summer faded into fall, and the aspen trees turned gold against the mountain slopes. I went fishing on the Roaring Fork, read my antique cookbooks by the fire, had dinner with Vivian and her friends. One morning I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the peaks. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the first hints of winter. A hawk circled lazily overhead. My phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. Dinner at my place tonight. I'm making that salmon recipe you taught me. I smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. I set down the phone and looked out at the mountains. My mountains, my home, my life. Everything I had built, everything I had protected. Life goes on, I thought, and it's beautiful. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.